Hello, I'm Harry Burton, and thank you for stopping by the channel. The interview you're about to watch is with James Roose-Evans. James was born in 1927 and has been involved in acting, theatre, directing and storytelling pretty much ever since. As well as being a prolific author, in fact, he's just published Older, a new book about his life in his 10th decade. James has created many landmarks, including establishing the Hampstead Theatre in 1959 and starting the Bledford Centre for the Creative Spirit in Wales in 1974. But as well as being a very visible leader in a ostensibly establishment mode, James has also been a pioneer in one or two less obvious fields. In fact, all his life, James has been on a spiritual quest of one sort or another, exploring, for example, the depth psychology of Carl Jung, both through his own analysis and through being a student of the perennial philosophy. James has been practicing meditation for 50 years and also teaching it for the last few decades. Inspired by meeting the dance pioneer Martha Graham in the 1950s, James has studied ritual as a means of exploring and even healing the wounds to the soul that seem to be the burden of rational, scientific humankind. And James has taken his fascination with ritual and all things sacred back into the theatre, where actors, writers and directors such as myself have been inspired and encouraged by his leadership and generosity. James is essentially a Gnostic, that most unfashionable of spiritual archetypes. He's an advocate of the language of the heart. He is modern man in search of a soul, which is perhaps why, as I was setting up the cameras in his flat, he warmed himself up by reciting a few lines of a certain Danish prince.
To sleep, perchance to dream, aye, there's the rub. Though in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause.
There we are. Did you ever play Hamlet?
Yes, I did, at the Meadowmarket Theatre, in bare feet.
Why in bare feet?
I have no idea.
And who directed you?
Me. It was my first theatre I was running, and it was very important. I remember the first production was The Seagull. I remember John Gilbert saying, "Aren't you nervous?" And with all the arrogance of youth, I said, "No, not at all."
How old were you?
I was 28, and I took the Tregorian out on the mud flats. I mean Tregorian, yes, out on the mud flats, barefoot, to get the experience of seeing gulls and all that. Very method.
Well, that was The Seagull. What about Hamlet?
Oh, sorry, that was The Seagull, yes. Hamlet, before the performance, I used to run round in bare feet outside the Meadowmarket Theatre on the lawn. So I was full of energy to burst on stage. I learned that from Donald Wolfett when he was in Othello. I was acting with him. He would go to the wings, to the ladders, shake himself up and then stall on stage for the fit scene.
You worked with Wolfett?
Yes, as a young actor, yes.
So when you read, for example, Stanislavski building a character,
yes,
and so forth, how did that fit with what you'd already seen and learned about stage acting? Was it a revolution?
I'm not quite sure where it started. I mean, I didn't go to drama school. I went straight into weekly rep, but I was steeped in Stanislavski. That's right, because at the very first job in Canterbury, weekly rep, in Othello, I had to double Brabantio with Lodovico, and as Brabantio, half an hour before the play began, I sit in the wings with our eyes closed, pretending I'm Brabantio having a nightmare, chasing Desdemona down endless corridors, and then suddenly I heard Iago's voice saying, "Signor Brabantio, Signor Brabantio," and I would pull on my dressing gown and hurry on stage. It was all that. And the first night, the fireman found me sitting in the wings. He thought I was sick. Anyway, I took it very seriously at the time.
You were preparing?
I was preparing, much too serious, yes.
So you didn't go to acting school?
No.
In fact, I know that you auditioned at RADA, as I did, and didn't get in.
Oh yes, that's right, yeah. And I auditioned at the Old Vic and didn't get in as well, yes.
In Bristol?
No, the Ovic in London. Was it the Ovic? George Trevine. No, not George Trevine. The famous French director.
Michel Saint-Denis.
That's right. I longed to get into that, but I did the wrong audition. I played Sir Epica Mammon, pretending to be a fat, heavy, middle-aged man. It was the wrong choice.
But you really went into acting without any training.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
And who did you, apart from reading Stanislavski, who were your heroes? Who were you emulating and trying to
I think I was
rise up to?
I think my great influence was my first great love, David March, actor at the Playhouse, who was a consummate actor. I watched him in many, many performances, and I learned so much from him. And then the rest was trial and error. And like things when I remember being the leading man at Bridgewater, and Kenneth Williams was the juvenile character. He had this trick. He'd stand with his back to the audience and make faces at us, trying to make us all corpse. And there was one play, very moving play called, well, I was an old music teacher and he was my beloved violinist pupil come back to visit me. And in one crucial scene, he stood making faces at me and I corpsed so badly that I had to go into the wings. And when I came back, he said, "Oh, look at her." And it was, so from then onwards, I learned never to look him in the face, always to act to one side or the other. That was the great thing about weekly rep, you learned all the time.
Right.
That's missing now, sadly.
To then find yourself directing yourself in Hamlet. I mean, you must have been under 30.
I was, yes, I was.
This was very precocious, if I may say so, James.
Of course it was. I had great confidence.
Where do you think that came from?
It is interesting because of the checkered childhood, as you know, the nervous breakdown at 20, analysis, all that. Who knows where it comes from? Yes. Though I think the sins of the fathers, I wonder about that. My mother's brother, Humphrey, what she said, he was a monk, and then he left to become an actor. I know nothing about him, but maybe something's passed down the genes.
I've known you for nearly 20 years. I had no idea you had an uncle called Humphrey, because that's my dad's name.
Oh, I see. Oh, yes, of course, that's right, yes. That's right.
I've noticed one or two other things that you and I have in common. An alcoholic parent.
Yes.
Growing up with a very troubled mother.
Yes, yes.
And directing The Dumbwaiter at some point.
Yes.
But this, I don't want to dwell on it, but your childhood included, as far as I can see, very traumatic occasions where your mother's distress was beyond your capacity to help her.
Yes, yes.
And what do you think that had as an impact on your taste for drama, perhaps?
All I know was that I never went to, the only theatre I went to as a youngster, I think at 12, the first time was to Peter Pan at Golders Green. And then from school, we saw Donald Wolfert and As You Like It at Cheltenham, and once to Stratford from school to see Macbeth, where the unforgettable performance was by a young unknown actor playing Banquo, Paul Schofield. I remember that so vividly.
Wow.
But as a small boy, for some reason, I would create a theatre under the table and move figures around. So where did that come from? Never having been to the theatre.
But if your uncle Humphrey was an actor...
Yes, I never knew him and I knew nothing about him.
No, but sometimes these things are...
That's what I meant. It's handed down somehow in the blood.
I never met my grandfather, and my own father had no interest in cricket. But by the age of 2 or 3, my obsession with cricket was off the charts.
Gosh.
One just doesn't know where these things come from.
No. Well, I think it's like I say in the book, talking about the relationship, for instance, between grandparents and grandchildren. And I know one woman in her 80s, her granddaughter is 21, loves to visit her in Sussex, and her question always is, what was it like in your day, Granny? She's searching for a sense of history, which very few young people today are interested in.
It's a long time ago, but do you think your Hamlet was informed by your relationship with your own mother?
I don't know, I can't remember what I did with it.
The closet scene?
Yes, could well be. Who knows?
So you went to Oxford.
Yes.
And obviously you had a big awakening there as far as wanting to be involved in theatre and
Well,
storytelling.
I had several awakenings. I remember lying on the floor. I went up to test my vocation as a monk for Ampleforth Abbey. And I remember lying on the floor in a state of indecision. Was I meant to be a monk, a writer, a teacher, an actor? I didn't know about being a theatre director. And eventually, of course, I became all those. But it took time and years of analysis to put the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together and find out the kind of person I was meant to be.
Why do you think you had a breakdown so young?
Oh, it was because of two mothers. And my mother was very possessive of me, as you know. And then, when the war broke out, she went off to work in a munitions factory, left my father for a while, and I was sent to stay with a family in Gloucestershire who taught me discipline, taught me to cook, to garden, to study. I was bottom of the class. I rose to top of the class. And I began to call this woman mother, inverted commas. And all hell broke out. And there was a scene in London where the two women met and screamed at each other. And my mother said, "You're never to see Mrs. Pollard again." And she honoured that for the rest of her life. She wouldn't see. So when I went into analysis, Dr. Oakey said, "It's not surprising. Two mothers tearing one apart."
And to be banished from the good one.
The one who taught me so much, yes.
Do you remember any... I think we've talked in the past about James Hillman's wonderful idea about acorn theory, that the acorn is contained, that the child contains the acorn of the great oak, and that moments of feeling called to do something are evidence of a daemon, Plato's daemon, that idea of that we've got something to do in this lifetime.
I think a simpler description is actually Jung's, that each of us comes into this life with the blueprint of the person we're meant to
Quite.
be. And sadly, a lot of people are born millionaires and end up paupers. They waste their talents and could never drink of water.
At any point, can you remember any sense early on of a feeling of being of calling, perhaps the monk archetype, or the any sense of feeling very attracted to something?
Well, I obviously was attracted when I went to Aberforth. I fell in love with it and sent to the abbot, said, "Can I join?" And he wisely said, "Go to our house of studies in Oxford, find out more what kind of people monks are and what kind of person you are." That was very, very wise advice.
What age was that?
1949, 27, 30, 47, 22.
So was that before?
That was already an analysis.
But had you already been in the army?
I've been in the army. That's where I became a Catholic, in the army in Trieste.
Can you say anything about the attraction to Catholicism as was it a new beginning for you spiritually?
I had a great friend in my teens, a remarkable man, a devout Catholic, and I knew that one day I would become a Catholic. I was an Anglican, and it was in Trieste that it happened. And I remember after my first communion, the priest saying, the wonderful phrase, "E contento adesso." So how do you translate the word "e contento"? But it was the perfect word. And
for peaceful, perhaps, inner peace.
Inner peace, yes. And for a good number of years, that nourished me. For instance, I remember meditating at Oxford on the Holy Family, Mary, Joseph, and the Child, in order to integrate my own troubled background. I'm no longer a Catholic, but it remains a very rich part of my psyche. I've travelled a long way since then.
What was the army like for you?
Oh, it was a blessing, because I had to learn to live with other people, get on with different types of men. I did get beaten up. I was after I'd done my training. They didn't send me to the battle camp because they were afraid that throwing hand grenades. I didn't take any of it seriously, so they kept me away from that. But I went to join the Army Education Corps and had to live in Salisbury Plain in a barrack room with, I think, 20 other soldiers. And there was a bookcase I finally put on one side of my bed, and there was a curtain in this barrack room. So I created a little enclave for myself. Of course, that riled everybody. And one night I arrived back at the barrack, all the lights were off, and I heard voices inside, "Come in." And they held a trial over me. Who did I think I was? Why did I think I was separate? And then finally one of them, who was a journalist, he said, "What we're doing is all wrong." And I burst into tears.
Did they beat you?
And I did get beaten up once on the ground, yes.
My goodness.
It was a necessary lesson.
That's
Yes.
well, being brutalised is a horrible way
No, but the whole army was a very rich experience. And it's what's the word? Rite of passage,
Yes.
which is lacking today for young people.
What do you think of some of the ideas around at the moment about regenerating national service?
I don't have any ideas, except if it was good for me, because I didn't have to go to battle, it could be good for other young, particularly the young male, very much so.
I suppose wartime was a time of emergency, but
Well, this was after the war, of course. It was afterwards, was why I only did 18 months.
right.
It was just called conscription.
But you also did a lot of theatre in the army.
In the first infantry training, I put up a notice in a barrack room saying there would be play reading by candlelight at 7 o'clock. Then at Buchanan Castle, where I had to train soldiers in the art of speech, I put on productions of the theatre there. That's true, yes. Yes.
But they thought you were a bit special and different, or that you regarded yourself as above them or different from.
No, I didn't know, but I remember my commanding officer, not gay at all, but it was a great shine to me, very supportive, and he said that I'm going to send you to Trieste for the last 3 months. It'll be like a holiday for you. So that was wonderful. Go to Italy. And I remember going to the theatre where it was the end of the war, and the Olivier of Italy, called Renzo Ricci, was doing Hamlet. And I went to his performance. It's the first time he'd been back into Trieste after the war. And at the end of the second act, he came on stage. Flowers were being poured down, flags of Italy, people cheering. He then spoke a poem by Carducci, The Song of Italy, by heart. Everybody was weeping. There's still 3 acts to go.
That's the way to do it.
It was wonderful, yes. The huge theatre.
How did you find... Because you knew you were gay by the time you were 22 in the army, didn't you? Or was that not accurate?
No, not till I went up to Oxford.
Ah.
And then David March, knowing I was he was a Catholic too, testing my vocation. We spent a lot of time together. I didn't realise I was falling in love with him. But after 3 months, he suddenly said, "I love you." And I suddenly realised I'd found the elder brother I'd always wanted. And then we moved in together. The monks were very supportive. And that became a very important influence in my life. Yeah.
And the legal situation for homosexuals at that point, were you acutely aware of that?
No. I was an innocent. I mean, when I went up to Oxford, I had no idea. I didn't know what men and women did together. I didn't certainly know about men and men together. It's unheard of in this day and age, of course, that kind of innocence. But I'm quite glad I was innocent.
I don't know that it's completely unknown, because I think the archetype of the innocent is still with us, and therefore there must be people who haven't looked at the internet or had experiences too soon.
It's difficult if you're at school, all your fellow pupils.
Of course, yeah.
Yes.
Sure. So I want to just fold into this part of the conversation your beginnings with Jungian thought and Jungian ways of thinking about seeing things and so forth. That started. You met an analyst who had been taught by Jung, didn't you?
No, what happened was I think I was 20. I was passing a Catholic church in Ogle Street, never been there before. I thought, I'll go in for confession. I don't know what I said, but the priest said, who I never saw him, he said, I suggest you go and see a certain Dr. Elkish in Gloucester Crescent.
Oh my goodness.
And that was the beginning of my Jungian analysis. And then when I went to New York in 1955, I had a year with another Jungian, also trained by Jung, Masha Rollins, who never charged me. And she said, I make my rich patients pay for you. And then with a twinkle, she shouldn't have said, she said, besides, you're much more interesting. She was very good. She got me to keep a journal. She said, you're a lonely person. And keeping a journal is like talking to an intimate friend. I was very grateful for that advice. The Jungian and years of Jungian analysis, very important. Until one day, I came with Dr. Elkish, after many years, I had a certain dream, and he said, your analysis is at an end. And from that moment on, we met as friends, Franz and Jimmy, and he would sometimes share his dreams with me. And then just the end of his life, he wrote me a note saying, may I be allowed to say, you have cared for me as I have cared for you. May I be allowed to call you son? So he was the father I never had.
Goodness.
But I didn't discover it to that moment.
That's very beautiful.
It was. What a surrounding.
Yes. Because to grow up without a present father is a form of, it's a deprivation.
Of course it is, of course it is.
And then it sets up the need for the rite of passage of finding a second father.
Exactly.
Which is a great quest in a way to be on. Did you feel you were questing by the time you were out of Oxford? Did you know you were on a quest of some kind?
I think subliminally, yes, not self-consciously, but subliminally. I've always been searching. Still am.
And when did it become conscious, do you think, roughly?
Well, it must have been under analysis. That makes you very conscious. You're observing your dreams, you're painting pictures, all that. And there's a wonderful collage I made. I'd just come out of the army, I think, gone up to Oxford. It's of a naked youth kneeling in front of a great face of a black Buddha in the ocean. And there's a long passage I've written about I, Pericles, have emerged from the depths of the sea and kneel before you, blah, blah, blah. But it sets out my map of my life, actually. It's very interesting. That was the great thing about Elkish. You got one to paint, to draw. Not all analysts do that, of course.
No. But it's a creative imagination process.
Yes.
Very enlightened. And he'd been trained by you.
Trained by you. And then at the outbreak of war, his wife was also an analyst. They had two daughters. He came to England with one daughter, not speaking any English, and Paula went to New York with the other daughter. I met her years later. Obviously a very gifted analyst as well. Yeah. What a journey.
What took you to New York in 1955 to meet Martha Graham?
Well, in 1954, the Martha Graham dance company came to London the very first time. I knew in advance about it, so I booked for the first night. And I was so bowled over. I booked for every performance that season. I wrote 2 long letters to her. I was summoned twice to her presence. A long talk with her, the dressing room, and then the last night. And then her manager said, you come into our lives, it's very important, you must keep in touch. And I just knew what Martha was talking about was, no wonder Jungian analysts were making notes during her performances, because I realised that theatre could be sacred theatre about profound, deep issues. And so I thought I have to go to America to learn more about what modern dance is. And though I was at the Meta Market directing, and they offered me a second year, I turned it down, and I got a letter. I wrote to various universities, and finally the Juilliard School of Music in New York, the head of the dance faculty, said, we're looking for someone to integrate music, dance and drama. Will you come? I had to fly to Amsterdam to be interviewed, and then I went to New York, and I called it Theatre of the Imagination, and it was a wonderful director's opportunity to experiment and explore about creating rituals. That's where it all began. So that was a very, very crucial year, and I was asked to stay on. I remember Pearl Lang, one of Martha Graham's leading dancers, said, we need you more for dancers than actors. But I knew I had to come back to England to plough back what I learned into the theatre here. So back I came. A very rich year, yes.
Was seeing Martha Graham's company and going back and watching again, that was your first sense? Obviously you knew about ritual from church and so forth, but that was the first time that you woke up to the idea that ritual as a form had a place in storytelling in theatre.
Yes, yes. I mean, the one I always cite the work of hers called "Errand into the Maze," which was a two-hander. She took the myth, obviously, Theseus and the Minotaur, but in this work she enters, Graham herself, entering the maze, and finally encounters the Minotaur, a male dancer with the mask, and so terrified she can't bear to face it, and then slowly turns, confronts it, mounts it, and rides it out of the labyrinth. It's the most profound Jungian analogy of that. In other words, learning to ride your shadow, to tame it, to control it.
Integrate it.
Yes, so all her works were like that. Incredible depth, extraordinary.
You use the word shadow. Can you say just very briefly what that means to you
Well,
as an archetype?
it means for instance, if somebody says I hate so and so, she's so sluttish, that's often because one is sluttish oneself. One is projecting onto the other person. So in the process of analysis, you have to learn about your own shadow side. It's like St. Francis embracing the leper as the modernist image of embracing one's shadow, or again St. Francis taming the wolf of Gubbio is even another perfect image. These wild emotions inside one has to come to terms with them and know how to handle them.
Why?
To become an integrated person, otherwise you can be destroyed by them. They can lead you to impulsive behaviour, it can lead you to murder, all sorts of things, because you're no longer in control of yourself.
I heard James Hillman give a lecture once where he suggested that Shakespeare was so full of murderers and poisoners and disembowelers that because he felt he was in danger of doing those things himself in life, and by putting them on the stage didn't need to act them out.
That's very interesting. And where did it all come from for Shakespeare? It's amazing.
Well, we know where some of it came from. A lot of it came from mythology.
Well, no, but it's the same with all great art. I think it was Hillman who said three different kinds of knowledge. There's scientific knowledge where you weigh one fact against another. There's philosophic knowledge where you weigh one idea against another, and then what he calls contemplative knowledge. But I prefer the word intuition, because where does it come from? This gift of Bach, Mozart, Shakespeare, whatever.
Mm. And in Jungian thought, intuition is a close cousin of Sophia, of wisdom.
Yes.
Which I understand in Jungian terms, Sophia is the female counterpart of God.
Yes, of course, yes.
So I often wonder, about this time that we're in, which is so technological and so scientific-minded and rational, and what's been left out in the last 300-400 years, not least the kinds of rites of passage for young men that you were talking about just now, but so many other things. And that, Jung talked about the return of the feminine.
Yes.
Do you see that happening in the world? We're seeing an uprising of feminist politics and empowered women. Is that part of what Jung meant by the return of the feminine?
Well, it's only a part, because Sophia goes much deeper. She was with God at the big creating of the world. She's the depth of wisdom. I remember a remarkable nun at Stanbroke Abbey saying if women are to be ordained priests, they should be called priestesses, because it's a very different role, a woman as a priest to a male as a priest. And also, actually, Pope John Paul I, who was only Pope for a few weeks, once in St. Peter's Square, at one of his talks, he said, we have to learn to address God as our mother, to say, our mother who art in heaven. Because if God is infinitely all things, God must be both male and female. The trouble is that the three-letter word God is such a stumbling block nowadays, and it's because of this centuries of patriarchal approach that God is an old man with a long beard, with a young son to help him decide the bird flutter. It's all anthropomorphic. Whereas Meister Eckhart, as you know, said God is no thing. For me, God is an energy, a force, an ocean of love, if you like. But the whole universe is surrounded by this intelligence. It's not a person. That's a great mistake.
Mm. So by seeing Martha Graham and those dancers, you really were excited by the idea of...
It was a revelation. Yes, it was, yes.
How did the Hampstead Theatre Club happen?
Typical of me, leaping... there's a wonderful phrase, leap and the net will appear. Mind you, it doesn't always appear. But I was having coffee, I'd just been directing at the Belgrade Theatre, Coventry. I was having coffee with a colleague in Hampstead. He said, why don't you start a theatre here? And I said, but where? He said, the Moorland Hall next to the Everyman Cinema belongs to the church. So the next morning I went to see the vicar, booked it for a series of dates, a whole year, went straight down to the offices of the Hampton High. The following week there were headlines on the front page, Hampstead to have neighbourhood playhouse. It all happened as quickly as that. Then I had people in the high street, actors, passing out leaflets and all that. And so and the first 7 years we had no grants at all, there was no Arts Council, there was no fringe theatre then. And so we lurched from one financial crisis to another. But it was why we got all the new plays coming to us, because there were no other fringe theatres to try out new plays. So Michael Contra and everybody else were queuing up for us, do our plays for us. It was an exciting time.
An amazing undertaking. But you never had any thoughts about, am I the right stuff? Can I be a leader? You just knew.
But I said, leap. Yes, I've done that all my life. Otherwise, if you start prevaricating and becoming over-introspective, you kill the initiative. The thing is to jump and learn as you go.
I'd love to ask you about meeting Harold Pinter.
Yes.
Because I know that our friends at Leeds with their Pinter Legacy project
yes.
are very interested to hear stories, about people's experience. You directed the premiere production of The Dumb Waiter in London.
In London, that's right. What happened was that Walter Hudd, an actor who was director of the Central School, he said, I think you ought to look at this play. It was The Dumb Waiter. And so I said, we'll do it in the first season in the Moorland Hall. And I met with Harold in a pub. And I remember sitting across the table from him, as typical gesture, taking off his glasses, leaning towards me very intensely and saying, what would happen if you and I were locked in a room for a long time? He said, that's what the play is about.
That's true.
And then he directed The Room, we did the double bill, got rave reviews, went to the Royal Court. And years later he had a big party at the house, people on every floor. And I said to Vivian, what is this for? She said, it's how else we're thanking the people who helped him in his career. But I was never a close friend. I mean, I was always very friendly if I bumped into him. So that's all I have to say. Except there's a lovely thing in the final. We had to dress rehearse on a Friday night, perform on Saturdays and Sundays, and the caretaker of the school hall, grudging, very unsophisticated chap, he stood at the back of the hall watching the run-through of The Dumb Waiter, and he said, hey, the reason why that one chap kills the other is because he talks too much, isn't it? Perfect, because the intellectuals, when it opened, they were all arguing, what was this about? And that's what it was about. I told how I was delighted with that, yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
There was a critic who when my production opened in the West End, pontificated, but who is Wilson? They talk of Wilson. Is Wilson God? And Harold was furious. He said, no, he's Wilson. But was the room, was it a double bill at the
double bill, yes.
And when you read these plays, did you get them, or did you need a little bit of deciphering?
No, I was excited straight away. Yes. How could one not be?
Well, some people, of course,
no, that's true.
Don't get it and don't.
The critics certainly didn't, except for Harold. The birthday party just offered a week.
Why do you think critics are sometimes so incredibly slow to see something really new and exciting? Is it because they see too much theatre and therefore they're addicted to what they know?
That's possible. I wouldn't know, but I would hate to be a critic night after night after night. Yes. And you do have to sit through some dross anyway.
But The Room is a mystifying play.
It is.
And very, very funny for that reason. Was Henry Woolf in your?
Oh yes, he was. Yes.
Playing Mr. Kidd.
Yes, he was, and Vivian as well. Yes. It was a very exciting time. And George Vivian made a great mistake when they transferred to the Royal Court. He put The Dumb Waiter on first, whereas coming second after The Room, he got much more laughs.
Yes. When I did the readings for the Royal Court's 50th of those two plays, we did it the right way round.
Yes, yes,
And there was quite a good payoff.
yes.
So, Hampstead must have consumed your energies and time.
One worked all hours on £10 a week. Actors got nothing in rehearsal, but £10 a week where they're playing. And I've never forgotten, it wouldn't happen now, Edward D'Souza were rehearsing Private Lives. And the phone went during rehearsal. It was his agent, Philip Pierman. He came back very quietly to rehearsal, went on. We opened, we were a huge success, we transferred to the West End. It was only many months later I learned what happened. That Philip Pierman rang. Edward had been offered a big film part with a lot of money, and he already had 3 children to support. He said, I can't, I've given my word to Hampstead. It's incredible. I don't think any actor would do that now.
I think they would if they felt that loyalty to someone like you who...
Who knows. But
Not many though, it's a rare thing.
But it was a demanding time, exhausting time, but a very rich time indeed. Yes.
So was founding Bledford, which is a centre for creative
Spirit. Yes.
spirit, was that in a way a reaction to overwork and stress and needing time out?
Oh no! Again, it's a leap of the net will fall. I lived in the old rectory, and I thought, well, I better go to the church services. There were 4 every Sunday. And then the rector came to me and said, the church is on the provisional list for closure. What can we do? And I thought about it, and Hal and I talked about it for about 9 months. And I finally said to the rector, if we turned it into a centre for spiritual art, as well as a continuing place for worship. So the diocese gave permission. I got a leading church architect, George Best, to reorder the church space. And then I launched an appeal, and over the years I wrote thousands of letters, raised many thousands of pounds, and then the school became vacant. I raised the money for that. Then some barns and fields, I raised the money for that. So now there's a wonderful barn centre, the old school gallery, office, tea rooms, and a cottage. It's quite a little empire now. And it's flourishing.
And how does it sustain itself, with membership and...
Yes, at the moment, one of my friends left half her estate to the Bledford Trust, and that was put into a portfolio, so there was income from that, and somebody else left us a lot of money. But we now have a very brilliant fundraiser who's going to raise further funds, so it should now be completely self-supporting.
And can anyone go?
Yes. I mean, they've just finished the 25th anniversary of the very successful storytelling workshop, a 2-week workshop. And then at the moment now, there's the Shambhala 2-week meditation workshop, which is packed out every year. Some things do better than others, obviously, always.
And where is it? Is it in beautiful countryside?
It's in Radlowshire, sort of near Prestine, Ludlow. It's Prestine because of the festival. It's quite convenient. And it's about encouraging people to find their own creativity. I mean, putting it very basically, it's so much nicer if somebody brings you a jar of homemade chutney or jam, a loaf they made, a posy of flowers, rather than expensive gift from a boutique. And the more people can use their own creativity, the richer their lives are. That's what it's all about.
And do you believe that all human beings are made to be creative, that the potential is there in everyone?
Yes, certainly I've seen some surprises. Some people surprise me what they've uncovered to themselves. Yes, I think we're all capable of a great deal more. In fact, I quote actually, as you know, in passage of self, the elderly woman I wrote to who felt her life was wasted, and I said, buy a child's book of paints and paint whatever comes up. I better find the passage because it's so vivid and demonstrates this. A woman once wrote to me, having heard me speak on television. She was 62 and referred to the fact that she had only 6 months left to live. Quote, I need spiritual and mental help, she wrote. Till I heard you, I was resigned to sitting it out to the end. And her early letters were full of anger towards God, the church, the world. In the course of our correspondence, she revealed that at the age of 18, she studied art but had then developed a mental block against it, being afraid to allow herself to be spontaneous, because, as she expressed it, spontaneity is lovely, but there is a risk. And so rather than take this risk, she repressed her rich creativity, denied her true self, and, to quote, flung myself into secretarial work, changed jobs frequently, and ended up with only a state pension. I am left with the ability to feel beauty in all its forms, but no ability now to pick up pencil or brush. Too diminished and mentally exhausted to do, I am left with a sense of having wasted my life. I wrote back, asking her to do something, to go out and buy a child's box of paints, and to sit down each day and paint exactly like a child, whatever she was feeling. About 2 weeks later, there arrived a simple, almost primitive painting of a bowl of flowers exploding with colour. The shape was repeated underneath by a double shadow of the bowl, shaped like two large church bells with clappers. The dynamic colour of the flowers and the joyous swing of the bells expressed a powerful sense of energy and release, and with the picture came a letter. You have reached me, the real me, the soft, vulnerable me, the one that wants to climb out and flow and to be a kind and lovable person instead of tautened up, spitting aggression. I was so happy. Since then, and obviously long past the 6 months, the paintings and the letters continued. And it's to do with developing people's creativity. It's linked to spirituality, becoming a whole person. Rather a long quote, I'm sorry about that.
No, absolutely, absolutely lovely, and it reminded me. I think I've told you this before. When I first started directing, I ran some workshops very much based on your book, on your exercises, yes. And a woman of 55 who had been a singer, and she hadn't sung for 30 years. She'd just given her life up to her children, and she just moved on. And I had a letter came 2-3 months later. I'm singing, and I am back in my soul, back in myself.
Wonderful.
Unforgettable.
Yes.
But that was your doing.
Yeah.
Where did you, when you began putting this book, this is how I met you, was through this book, which I think I found in a second-hand bookstop shop. And I thought, I want to meet the man who wrote this. How did you create the extraordinary exercises and ideas of deep, soulful rehearsal and process?
It's interesting. Where did it? I mean, for instance, the journey to the frontier was a very powerful exercise. I'll give one example of it, and I'll try and answer your question. At a week-long ritual workshop in Wales, one friend, an actress friend of mine, the exercise is a variation of the journey to the frontier. There's the end of a studio, there's the line marking the frontier, and people normally set out to journey towards the frontier. It's different for everyone, do they cross it or not. But there's a version I do where people out of newspaper create a boat, and in it put a night light, and then they have to sail their boat to the frontier. And this all takes a long time. And on this occasion, everybody crossed over except for this one person who sat at the frontier with her circular boat with the night light in the middle. And when everybody had gone, she came towards me and said, "Will you blow it out? I can't." And I did. And later in the day, I discovered what it was. She had that day learned that she could no longer have a child. So it was a very powerful exercise for her. But where these ideas came from, sometimes dancing, I used to dance a lot to music on the radio, and once I was listening to Goreski's Third Symphony, and I began to dance it, move it, and I realised it was about a journey to the mother. So I then did a whole series of workshops about journey to the mother, which were incredibly powerful, particularly for the women who came. Yes, where does it all come from? I don't know.
Well, for people who don't know about these exercises, they very often involve thresholds and the crossing of thresholds.
Yes, yes.
They are, in effect, rites of passage.
Yes, they are.
In a very, I would describe it as a very safe container.
Yes.
A place where people can be supremely vulnerable.
Yes.
And forget time in fact drop into what the Greeks would call kairos,
Yes.
as opposed to chronos, eternal time, poetic time, dream time, and experience through their own volition and choices how and when and whether to cross these thresholds,
Yes.
which they have attached meaning to by slowly discovering something they want to work on, or an issue, or a relationship, or something that is significant for them emotionally.
I think also it is a question of taking time. For instance, I recently quoted, I've done many workshops for the washing of the feet, and there's one woman wrote an extraordinary letter saying how powerful it was, the experience. I was preaching. Jesus, it's very interesting, the churches, that Jesus did two things at the last meal. Bless the bread and wine, so this is my body, but he also washed everybody's feet, so you must all do the same. And it doesn't happen anymore, or if it does, it's just perfunctory. But if you really spend an hour bathing and washing somebody's feet, you will learn so much about themselves and about your partners if you're washing your partner's feet. It's having time, space is very important. Time out. We live in such a rushed society.
And we've barely touched on the word, but it's a word I bring into my work with students and so forth, because they haven't really heard it applied to performance and so forth. But the soul, the psyche, the soul, what are your feelings about the soul and our relationship to it, and these exercises in terms of activating it? And I know it's a biggie, but it's so important.
I think the whole journey in life is about discovering every aspect of oneself and integrating it, weaving it together. So it's an inner experience, an inner journey, which then is reflected in one's outward activities. It's what Jung referred to as modern man in search of a meaning. A lot of people have no meaning in their lives at all, and the meaning is found inside oneself. And churches nowadays, they don't meet the needs of people. There are too many words, it's all rather antiquated, and yet people are hungry for things of the spirit, very much so. It's interesting, our meditation group, which has been going now about 12 years, it's a very interesting mix. A disc jockey, actors, Alexander teacher, analysts, etc. And only I think 3 of them are Christians, but it's a great sharing of the depths of silence. And now, I used to give the talk every time, once a month, but now the group is so mature, they take it in turns. Dan, the disc jockey, is doing the talk the next 2 weeks' time, and then an actor's doing it after that, and now I'll do a talk. And so what we're lacking actually is a sense of community. I think there was a report in the Times about recently. One knows that over 50% of older people are lonely, and many have television for company. But a recent report in the Times shows that young people between the ages of 24 and 35 are also suffering from loneliness. And I think it's because we no longer have street communities, house communities. Even in the house in which one lives with flats, rarely do people come together and work together. So we've lost all that. So each of us is alone and lonely. So I think small groups, whether it's a book group, meditation group, there are various such groups. I think they're all important. They create a sense of family, of friendships.
That's beautiful. I wanted, at this point, I thought maybe I should remind you of the quote from Peter Brook that you put in the book. A great ritual, a fundamental myth is a door, and she who can experience the door within himself, herself, passes through it most intensely. And I think that's what your book, Passages of the Soul,
Yes.
taught me, was that intensity is something that people crave and long for, but don't necessarily know how to name.
No.
And that if you can create a meaningful ritual that is safe and boundaried, people can connect to something in their depths that's been abandoned and forgotten,
Yes.
and it's a complete renewal.
Yes, it is. It is. There's very little of it going around.
But I don't believe that the light ever quite goes out on it.
No.
And maybe when things get really dark, like they are a bit at the moment with Mr. Trump and Mr. Johnson, maybe that's when this sort of hearing you, that was my impulse for wanting to talk to you really like this, not least because I love our friendship, but you've been doing this for so long and with such passion and commitment and helped so many people, I'm sure. And just because things have gone a bit dark out there doesn't mean you've stopped. You've kept going, and other people have kept going.
I think yes, the book Older, I do say, well, you saw it in the press release, that it's a constant process of unlearning and letting go of things in order to learn new things. It's a continuing journey right to the end. It's so sad. Many men, for instance, when they retire, one sees they either slump in front of the television, spend hours in the betting shop as I see them, or if they're wealthy, they play golf every day. They're wasting rich years.
Tell me a bit more about the title is?
Older. Because people sometimes say to me, I'm old, and I say, no, you're older. The word old with a D at the end sounds like a door slamming, finish. Whereas older is, as Eliot says, old men should be explorers still. One should go on exploring and discovering. And I find that very exciting in my 10th decade, amazingly.
So how did Older come about?
Oh, my publisher friend, Tony Morris, who's chairman of the Leather Centre, it was his idea and the title. Now, at one point when I was working on it, he said, I wonder if you shouldn't change the title to Growing Older. And I said, no, that sounds horticultural. No, Older is much better. It was his idea, so the book's dedicated to him.
And what form does the book take?
Oh, it's a diary, a journal, day by day. So it's a rich, lucky dip. It's full of different things, yes.
A daily diary?
Almost. 1 or 2 days. Originally, I would sometimes say, I missed this day, but I've left those out. I've left about 6 days out, otherwise it's daily, yes, yes.
What surprised you about the writing of this new book?
I learned a lot. It's again another journey of discovery. It's extraordinary. Life is so rich.
Do you meet yourself and find that you like yourself in the book?
Yes, I'm very truthful. I think you have to. Well, I think. What's the point of years of analysis unless you can be truthful about yourself?
Well, analysts will tell you that half their clients aren't interested in being truthful with themselves.
No, I know myself pretty well. And I say things like, for instance, I've meditated all these years, yet because of old age, I often drop things. I say, fuck! And then I realise it's just a wonderful explosion of energy and it lets go. So I don't worry about that. I'm not alone. I've gathered from other people my age, they drop things. One's hands aren't quite so in control.
And when will the book be published?
September the 30th, at Dort's again.
In
Marylebone High Street, yes.
Wonderful.
Yes.
And will there be electronic editions of this book?
I don't know. Zuleika Books is a new publishing company which is quite dynamic and very successful. They're full of bright ideas, so who knows? What do you mean by, oh, you mean a Kindle? Yes. I'm sure if Tom thinks the chap who's found it, I leave that all to him. He's doing a paperback, and then next year there'll be is it called a trade edition, slightly cheaper edition. So anyway, he's got it all planned.
When did you learn to meditate? How did that happen?
At the time in the 60s, the school of meditation was, the Maharishi, all that. So I started, I went, was inducted as it were, and then I would have to go every month. And I found that different instructors each time to give one different advice. So then I started practicing entirely on my own. and I've been practicing on my own ever since, over more than 50 years. I think one of the problems in our society is a fear, a lack of silence. Many couples get up and they switch on radio or television or whatever all day long. And even in the Times recently, there was a 2-page article that many people having sex are still looking at their iPods and all that. Endless distractions. And what meditation does, the practice, is to contact to learn to be with silence, to be silent, and then to find the inner silence within oneself, which is very powerful, very rich. But it does call for discipline, because there can be days, weeks even, when it's a struggle, because endless busy thoughts, like blue bottles, buzzing around all the time. But you persevere with centering down into this inner silence. And there are different ways of doing it. You can do the Buddhist meditation of breathing in, pause, breathing out on 1, up to a count of 8. And then if you lose count, go back to the beginning again. That's a very good one. Or some people find a mantra, which is a word or a phrase. One of our group, for instance, when her husband got Parkinson's, which he had for 12 years before he died, she took as her mantra the words, that I may be filled with loving kindness, because she knew that she'd be very sorely tested. And the slow results, the harvest of meditating, is you aren't swept high by praise or plunged low by criticism. You learn to keep an even balance. You learn not to lose your temper. You learn to be patient with people, however boring they may be. You're a healthier human being as a result. So it's nothing religious about it. It's just a natural practice that we can do. This is where the Buddha, we owe it to the Buddha basically, don't we? This practice of meditation.
The way you said that makes me think of the Jungian idea of being in the tension of opposites.
Yes.
And that is the most opportune way to create new consciousness.
Yes.
Rather than to be banged back and forth between extremes, to open up a space where you coexist with the extremes,
Yes.
but don't go there. And that is the best way to create new consciousness.
Yes, because often when you're meditating, what happens is resentments come to the surface, lusts come to the surface, worries come to the surface, and you learn to acknowledge them, say, yes, I recognize you, and then let them go. And they do eventually recede.
Is there a difference in the quality of inner peace from using a mantra and being silent?
I don't know the answer to that one.
Which do you prefer?
I think, for instance, our group is not based on any particular form of meditation. Some have a mantra, some count up to 8, some just do what Quakers do, centering down, listening to the inner side. Some of the most powerful Quaker meetings I've been to is 60 minutes of total silence, dynamic. There was one meeting I went to in Providence, Rhode Island on Easter Sunday, Quaker meeting. I was the only person who got up to speak, and all I said was, there's something dead about this meeting. And afterwards they said, how did you know? How did you know? Will you come back next Sunday? And I thought only Quakers could respond like that. So there are dead silences, and they're living silences, which are so powerful.
Oh.
I think this is what Pentecost is about, when especially the tongues of fire descended. Suddenly it's pulsating. It's cleansing. It was a good 60 minutes at a Quaker meeting of total silence. It's wonderfully cleansing.
Do you think of yourself as a Quaker?
No, I've learned a lot from the Quakers and have enjoyed attending meetings, but I don't feel the need to go to church or anywhere anymore. I've moved on.
Judi Dench is a Quaker, isn't she?
She is, that's right, yes.
Didn't you teach her at the Central School?
Yes, I did. Oh gosh, yes, you're quite right. At Vanessa Redgrave. Yes, that's right. And I've lost touch with her, but she's lovely. And Michael Williams, I was a student of mine at RADA, yes. Gosh.
And was Judy clearly a very special actor at that point?
Yes, it's an inner quality that shines out of her.
Do you think actors can learn to bring that inner quality to the fore, or is it fundamentally a gift from God?
I think it's a gift, yes. It's like, I remember Patrick Garland telling me a story. He directed Ingrid Bergman in a play at the West End, and a colleague of his went to see it. He said, "It's so clever, Patrick, what you've done, that she has this follow spot." Patrick said, "There's no follow spot, it's her own inner quality."
That's wonderful.
And Richard Burton had the same thing, you couldn't take your eyes off him. And Paul Scofield, of course, too.
So a kind of charisma.
It is, it's a gift.
I think Rylance has it too.
Yes.
But it's quite rare.
Very rare, very rare.
So how long have you been meditating now?
84, 94, 104. It was about 50 years, more, yes.
And you do it pretty much daily?
Daily, yes. Half hour in the day, each day. And sometimes in the evening if I feel like it.
Do you nod off?
No. Only at night. No.
So would you recommend meditation as a beginning practice for somebody who wants to begin having, for want of a better phrase, a spiritual experience? And what is a spiritual experience as opposed to a religious one?
Well, religion is primarily to do with creeds and external forms, in particular whether you are following Allah or Buddha. Well, no, Buddha is not a religion, Buddha is not a religion. But no, spirituality, I think it's what more people are in search of today, is a spiritual content to life rather than the religious content. I think if somebody's going to start meditating, they actually need to join the group. We have one member of our group, I better be careful here, just say one member of our group, I won't say who it is, who had been going through a great crisis. And then I lent him a book called The Buddha, Jeff and I, and it had a powerful effect on him. He started going he's a Christian, goes to the Hampton Parish Church, but he started going to the Eccleston Square, the Buddhist Centre, and since then been on a week-long Buddhist meditation course. I think you need to practice just on your own without it, you could get lost. So I think you need to relate to some group to learn, and then you work on your own. It's a thing of mutual support. What's wonderful about our group is very hamster. We all have Prosecco afterwards, those who drink, or water. But they formed different groups of conversation. Friendships have sprung up over the years, very strong friendships.
You yourself have been ordained as a
Anglican priest, non-stipendiate, unpaid.
But priest, is that the right word,
Priest,
or
yes,
minister?
Priest, yes.
But would it be fair to say that meditation has been the most consistent practice of your spiritual life?
Yes.
But you also pray. I know you do.
I've come up. We had the last meeting of our group. We were in the garden, and I was talking about prayer because Jesus says, "Ask and knock and it shall be opened. Ask and it shall be given. Seek and you will find." I said, certainly true. If you seek, you will find. But you can often knock and just bruise your knuckles, and you can ask. And I said that doesn't make sense because farmers can be praying for rain, and at the same time married couples that are not married praying for fine weather for their wedding and honeymoon. And so I don't believe in asking for anything. What I do now is in practice, and I write about it, I think, in Older, is if somebody's in trouble, about to have an operation, going through a difficult relationship, whatever, I tell them that I will sit in silence for them for an hour. It was inspired by thinking of Jesus saying, "Can you not watch with me 1 hour?" And so I will sit in silence for an hour, totally focused on that person. And I think it's related to the gift of telepathy, that we can transmit energy. I think that's how absolute healing works. And also at a very simple level, which I was telling them, we can be in the middle of doing anything, and suddenly somebody's name comes to the surface we haven't thought about for ages. And either the phone rings, as that's personal and I wanted to talk to one. So telepathy, I think, is a more important form of prayer for me.
Is that the front door as well, or just is that the way the phone rings?
That's the phone ring.
Something that you and I have more than once talked about, synchronicity, the idea of meaningful coincidence.
Yes.
Tell me one story from your life about a strange and unaccountable.
Well, when I was 31, I'd never been to a gay pub. I was very lonely, so I went to the William IV on one evening. Unknown to me, Howell Jones, who's become my partner for 50 years, he was 9 years younger, just out of the army, a country boy, never been to a gay pub. If we hadn't met that evening, it seemed planned. And Howell used to say it was meant. So I think, and all the key, like going to that priest for confession, was saying, go and see a Dr. Elkish and work. Otherwise I wouldn't have known anything about Jungian analysis. I think that there is I have no doubt there's a pattern and a purpose to every life. And if we learn to listen, we will see which path to go, which path not to go. I mean, sometimes in life somebody appears to stop from going down the wrong path, which is very valuable. I'm very grateful to people who have criticised me always and held up a mirror to me. That's very important. I remember when I was younger, the director of Methurites, whom I knew through Eleanor Fargen, he said, you must stop name dropping. And it was very valuable because I was so insecure, sure. I had met a lot of famous people through Eleanor and others, but I realised why I was doing it was to boost my own ego. So that was a valuable bit of advice. So thank God for friends who are not afraid to speak the truth. And having now younger friends is very valuable because they tease one, challenge one, all that. You can't be pompous.
Hal's been dead now, how long?
8-9 years.
And how have you coped without your beloved?
That's an interesting question. I didn't weep at all when he died because we'd been so blessed. There was no cause to weep. I knew that all was well. The only time I wept was a nun lent me a DVD of the marvellous writer John O'Donoghue. And at one point he says, when we see somebody dying, that's what we see. But to those waiting on the other side, they're seeing somebody being born. And I shed tears of joy. What was your question again? How
you have coped without your beloved.
Then, obviously, working on many drafts of the book was very helpful. But then, interestingly, which is in older, I started, instead of going to bed at 10, I started going to bed at 9, then at 8. And Kevin, who shares the flat with me, said, what's going on? And I said, I think it's mainly only now, I'm being hit by the loss of Hal's physical presence, in that we could be in the same room of an evening, he would be reading, I would be writing, occasionally would look up and smile, didn't have to say anything. That was part of it. But 10 nights later, this is where the unconscious is so extraordinary. I woke up in the middle of the night with the phrase existential loneliness. I didn't know what it meant. So I got up and Googled it. It said lack of a role. I thought, that's it, bang. Not just how. I no longer direct, I no longer teach, I no longer perform. I do write, of course, but I'm a yesterday's man in that sense. And once I understood that, I started going back to bed at 10 o'clock again.
So you got a gift from the change of routine.
It's all there. All we need, all the wisdom is inside us. Absolutely, no question of that. And so one accepts that. I think every decade you have to make changes anyway, adjust.
And what did you learn about fidelity from being with Howell for so long?
I think the fidelity is about a true love, is accepting the other person, warts and all. Well, that's the clumsy way of putting it. Well, for instance, example in the book, the book on loving I'm writing, Malcolm Muggeridge, who I knew very well, he once said, he acknowledged to me, he said, I've been a great womanizer all my life. But Kitty stood by him, and when I knew them in old age, once out walking, they walk hand in hand, after supper they'd be sitting clasped hands across there. They became very close. And Jung was the same. His marriage was central to his life. But obviously Tony, what's her name? Wolf was important as Emma came to recognise that Tony was able to help Jung in a way that she couldn't. So you learn to accept the wonderful remark that Tony Wolff, as an analyst, gave to a woman came to see her about her husband having an affair with another woman. And Tony Wolff said, why don't you invite the woman to lunch or get to know her, and you may discover that she's able to give something to her husband that you can't. It's very wise, that.
Very wise.
So true fidelity is accepting the person in their entirety, not as one would like them to be or think of them as. Shut up, James.
No, don't shut up. Well, nearly. But I don't want to exhaust you. This has been such a rich.
But very challenging, very good questions too, yes.
Well, I never have any trouble,
Asking questions?
Talking to you.
I see,
You're
yes.
so open and
also,
wise.
We're kindred spirits in that sense. There's a link which one doesn't have with everybody. No,
Right.
That's true. Yes.
So, what do you feel about dying, about death?
I have no fears.
You've done aging.
I've done aging. I have no fears of dying. In fact, if you I'll read you the final words of Older. If you could just switch it off for a moment.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that.
I'd just like to quote from the final page of my new book, Older, which is coming out in September. This is what I wrote. One morning recently, I woke with a deep sense of my ship coming into harbour at long last, and it reminded me of a painting by Margaret Neve entitled Homecoming. It depicts a night sky with a huge full moon reflected in the ocean, and at the centre of the reflection is a sailing ship coming into harbour, and on the quay with their backs to us are 5 people in long robes waiting for the arrival. And looking at the painting, I sometimes wonder, is it Ulysses finally returning home after a long journey? And will it be likewise for each of us when we die, that there will be those waiting to greet us? And this is why I think of Kafaf, his poem Ithaca, about one long voyage to Ithaca that each of us has to make, for which we have been aiming, but when we arrive, we find there's nothing more to give us. And so I'd like to quote, Ithaca has given you the beautiful voyage. Without her, you would never have taken the journey. But she has nothing more to give you. And if you find her poor, she has not defrauded you. With the great wisdom you have gained, with so much experience, you must surely by now have understood what Ithaca means. None of this implies that I'm about to die, but the readiness is all. I've had such a full life, blessed with so much love. And so, no wonder St. Teresa of Avila wrote, the important thing is not to think too much, but to love much. I can get some food.
Great.
Thank
you. What a wonderful ending. Oh, James, I feel so blessed that you've.
Well, it's been a very creative experience, and thank you for it.
Well, thank you.
Food.
Do you mind if I film you just pottering around a bit?
You do whatever you need to do, yes?